I want to start with this video, actually, of Peter Doocy asking Vladimir Zelensky a question during a press spray in the Oval Office today. So basically, for people who were mercifully free from the news cycle today, there was a press spray in the Oval Office where reporters were peppering Donald Trump and Vladimir Zelensky with questions. Then we got a televised broadcast of Trump doing a roundtable with leaders from all over Europe, head of the EU, head of NATO, Giorgia Meloni, Keir Starmer. It was German chancellor. It was a really spectacular scene. But here is Peter Doocy asking Zelensky a question, S2.
President Zelensky, are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners, and we will do our best for this. So, and I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war. And we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
Mr. President. So there was no confrontation with J.D. Vance. He was sitting off to the side in this Oval Office meeting, Andrew. And just lastly, before I toss you, President Trump has posted F1, we can put this up on the screen at Truth Social, confirming media reports that he has since called President Vladimir Putin of Russia. Big takeaways from today: they are setting up a trilateral meeting where Donald Trump seems like he will be involved in that. They are working within the next 10 days on that time frame to work out what security guarantees for Ukraine from the United States and NATO may look like. And Trump at one point said that they might not actually need a ceasefire to start working on this peace plan. So, Andrew, you wrote last week on New Jerusalem that after Friday's meeting, conservative media felt compelled to depict Trump, quote, as masterful and triumphant. Big media skewered every development as a Trump error or loss. He's fascinated by Putin, they said. He handed the Russians a win just by meeting with him. He was ready to betray brave little Ukraine for his own benefit. There's nothing I saw in any news report that even vaguely resembled a reliable fact about where the summit ended up. But of course, Andrew, today we could watch much of the action, not all of it. So what sense did you get about whether there's real progress happening here?
Well, I think there's progress in the sense that nothing was happening before. And I think that the wonderful thing about Trump in these situations is that he is a true deal maker, and that he understands the reality, and he understands you can't get everything you want. He gets frustrated with Zelensky, I think, because Zelensky is in a position that I kind of sympathize with. He has to pretend to be a bigger power than he is, and he's fighting against a massive force that is obviously not going to go away, and it's obviously not going to cede any of the land that it's taken. And meanwhile, what just struck me on Friday and throughout the weekend until today was the way that the press, we know nothing about any of this. We know nothing about what's happening or where it's going to go. And the reason we know nothing is that each person involved has his own reason to skew, to spin the facts. So Putin is an inveterate liar. He's a cartoon villain. He's a genuinely bad hat who just every word out of his mouth is untrustworthy. Trump is a negotiator, so he's always looking at the end of the line. He's always trying to manipulate how he can get to the place he wants to get to, the best place he can get to. If you read the New York Times, for instance, that says, well, Joe Biden, said talk tough to Putin, but Trump really likes him better. Trump doesn't like Putin. Trump knows exactly who Putin is, but just like, a prize fighter getting into the ring with a prize fighter who's just as big as he is, he knows he's up against a wily, powerful opponent, and so he treats him with respect. So none of the things that the press said were going on. None of them. What you have is Donald Trump, who is a guy who he imagines this country's future in economic terms. He does not look at America and think one day we can march, conquer all of Western Europe. One day we're going to send our soldiers into Russia. That's not what he's thinking. He's thinking one day we can turn the supply side problem around. We can bring manufacturing back to our friends and ourselves, and we'll have this wonderful new golden age of prosperity. he wants peace for that to happen. And I think he has a genuine heart for the people who are being slaughtered by the thousands every day in Ukraine and in Russia as well. And so I think he has an interest in bringing peace. It's not his war. He didn't start it. He wasn't there when it started. He's the only he has become the essential person for bringing people together. He did that today. He brought the Europeans in. Very important. Remember, it is their war. It's not our war. It's their war. And so he brought them in and they're talking. A lot of what was being talked about, I thought, was pure nonsense. The kind of NATO, like the make-believe NATO security guarantees that we're going to give Zelensky and give Ukraine, never going to happen.
Why do you think that's an important point, Andrew?
Because it essentially puts in Putin's hands the power to start a world war anytime he wants, and to bring down, bring all these people into conflict that they may not want to get into. And certainly we're not going to give NATO privileges to Ukraine. We're not going to war with Russia because of Ukraine. And nobody wants to say this stuff, but it's just true. I mean, listen, I think Ukraine was hard done by. I think the Russians are wrong. I think, I don't think Ukraine is a wonderful country. I think it's a corruptocratic country. But still, it deserves not to be invaded by Russia, and Putin is completely out of line. That said, the reality on the ground is that Putin has taken land. He's not going to give it back. We're going to have to cede certain things. Zelensky's going to have to cede certain things. He doesn't have to admit that he's doing it. In fact, I think that would be wrong. He doesn't have to say this is now Russian territory. What he has to say is, I will make peace in spite of the fact that you're sitting on our land. That's usually the formula for this. And so I don't necessarily want to get into a World War I situation where we are bound by treaty to enter war with Ukraine. I don't want a single drop of American blood. I'm not an isolationist. I believe you have to fight sometimes, but I don't want a single drop of blood, American blood, spilled in the defense of Ukraine. I don't think Trump does either, and I don't think the American people want that either. I mean, I'm pretty sure that's the case. So we can't give them security guarantees like NATO, and that's what they were talking about. And I just don't think that is a reality. If what they're talking about is we and the Europeans will continue to supply Zelensky as long as he needs supplies in a realistic way, if Putin doesn't back off, I think there's some grounds for that happening. I think that something like that might happen. But look, nobody knows what's going to happen because nobody knows how Putin's going to play it. It takes two to make peace, and I think that Zelensky has good reason to not want to cave in. And Putin is just a very, very difficult guy. One of the things about Putin that I don't think people talk about enough, Putin's a very powerful tyrant.
I thought you were going to say a horseback rider.
Yes. He rides bears.
People don't talk about it enough.
He rides bareback on polar bears. And I think the thing is, even the most powerful tyrant has a glass jaw. That at some point, if he gets his country into deep waters in Ukraine, which he already has, if he can't get out of it, if he can't continue to supply the army there with men, if he can't continue to afford to pay for an offensive war, at some point, he's going to wake up one morning and there's going to be a bunch of guys standing over him with long knives, and his reign is going to be over. So he, in some ways, at some level, he's fighting for his life as well. And I think that that's something that Trump understands that the press doesn't talk about at all. The press has been shameful. I mean, the press has just been every word out of Trump's mouth is some kind of concession, some kind of, they say he's entranced. He's entranced with Putin. Like, in a pig's eye, I mean, he knows exactly who this guy is. He knows exactly what he's dealing with. And he knows that Putin is probably weaker in some ways than he seems. And so I think he's playing the cards that he was dealt. He came into the middle of he came on stage in the middle of the story. He's playing the cards he was dealt. And I think so far he's doing an excellent job in the sense that without him, there'd be nothing. So I guess what I say is it's going to be a constant wait and see situation, and the press just has to be ignored. The end of that piece on Substack you were reading is "Make like Socrates and know you know nothing," and I think that's essentially the case we're in, as we're in so often with our corrupt press, our press that is just corrupt down to its bottom, and it's a shame.
And media incentives are stacked completely against epistemological humility. There's no incentive for that in the 24-hour news cycle. In fact, people were upset with Peter Doocy for asking that question and said it was plucked from the mouth of Kremlin propagandists, even though it's a perfectly legitimate point to pose to Zelensky. And let me get your take on this, Andrew. This is Nikki Haley responding to this post from Newswire. Trump does not rule out sending U.S. forces to Ukraine, and she responds, I was supposedly the warmonger. America should not support Ukraine with the equipment they need, but we should not send cash or American soldiers. And I wanted to get your take on that because I saw some people genuinely concerned about Trump flirting with the idea that we shouldn't rule out anything. To me, it sounded like him doing his typical cagey negotiating strategy. Did that concern you at all as we're speaking in the context of security guarantees and what those could look like?
Well, when I heard the word security guarantees as in NATO, I did sit up a little bit in my chair. And my first thought was, oh, Trump is never going to let that happen. That is not a thing that he's going to allow to happen. Trump is always on the move. This is the thing. He's always in motion. And the press is always reporting on him as if he were a snapshot. They're always reporting on him as if he's standing still. So if he says, Putin, he's a smart guy, we get along great. It's, he loves Putin. It's never, he's trying to move to a place where they can have a conversation, which only he has done, only he is capable of doing. We've had the guys talk tough to Putin. We've had them shake their fist at him. One of them was a Kristen Welker on one of the Sunday shows, said to Marco Rubio, why don't you just tell Putin that we're going to put sanctions? What is she talking about? She's like living in this like little bubble. So my short answer is no, I do not believe that Donald Trump is going to put us in a position where American lives have to be spent defending Ukraine. Because in the end, I think the truth is we don't care enough. It's not important enough to us to risk our lives for that, to risk our sons' lives for that. It would be ridiculous. And I think that he's smart enough to know that. But I think reporting on Trump as if every word that he speaks in a negotiation, especially if it strikes the press as negative toward him, that every word is somehow carved in stone is absurd. He's constantly negotiating. He's constantly giving and taking, seeing where the weaknesses are. And if you don't report him like that, you're not reporting him at all. You're not doing anything except sitting there throwing mud like some, former late night comedian about to lose a show. I think this is the thing that I find.
How dare you?
Yeah, exactly. This is the thing I find so appalling about our current situation. We're living in a nation at the center of world events in which no information is reaching the public. Almost, I'm exaggerating, but only a little. No reliable information is reaching the public, so that when you have people, just to name one, like Tucker Carlson saying, America bombed Nagasaki because that's where the Christians live, which is an absurd statement. It might be true. It's as true as anything else that you're hearing from the old reliable sources. I think it's a really dangerous situation for us to be in. I think that it's something that needs reform. And I think it's going to, because of the First Amendment, we have no power to reform it through the government. But I think that people of goodwill are just going to have to start getting the news out and really doing reporting.
I think Trump was really prescient in recognizing that we'd entered a new phase of propaganda and the propaganda war. And I want to ask you about, we can put V1 on the screen as we're talking. This was Trump's flyover during the Anchorage summit in Alaska with Putin. And if you're not watching this and you're just listening, you may have already heard about this or seen it yourself. But as they're walking the red carpet off of the airplanes, you see this spectacular flyover happening in the skies of Anchorage as Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin are walking a literal red carpet in Anchorage, about to greet the press. So, Andrew, on that note, I really was struck watching. I thought today Trump was reveling in the pomp and circumstance, in the Oval Office with the new literal golden age of the Oval Office on display as he sat astride Zelensky. He loved having the world leaders sit around the table and, thank him and participate in this kind of Western diplomacy theater. Do you think Trump is sort of ahead of the media, that he's sort of framing this successfully as a path to peace, such as that if it does happen, he has the upper hand over what the media has been saying for so long because he was conscious about putting out this imagery and being really intentional about it? Am I reading too much into it? Or is this Trump really actually striding towards the historical marker of the golden age in foreign policy, as he would put it?
Well, I think he is far ahead of the press in that he does love the pomp and circumstance. He loves, maneuvering. I mean, that was a great moment when the B-2 flew over. I laughed out loud when I saw that. I mean, it was basically Trump saying to Putin, Iran didn't like them and you won't like them either. And I thought that was, it's really funny stuff. The difference between Trump and the press is Trump understands that it's all make-believe, that it's all maneuvering and all image making, whereas the press takes it all very, very seriously. I mean, these are things that people do. In some ways they're petty, like when your boss sits you in a chair that is, lower than his chair or something like that. It's that kind of petty maneuvering. But
Ben Shapiro would never do that.
No. Well, you can't tell
that
if he's sitting in a chair that's lower than yours.
Set you up for that one.
Yes,
Softball.
yes,
Right
I appreciate the straight man. But he understands that these are things that are happening, but he also understands the realism, the realities on the ground. I mean, that moment when he was yelling at Zelensky that time and he said to him, "You just don't have the cards to be talking like that." That was just true. That was just the truth. He doesn't, he has to play. Look, I worked in Hollywood for a long time where there's a lot of negotiating, a lot of bargaining on. I know what it is to play a strong hand and a weak hand and to negotiate over your career in ways that you think like, oh, I have nothing here, but I got to pretend I have something. I get all of that. And I think Trump gets all of that. The press just reports on it with this kind of po-faced stupidity that makes you think like Trump, they report on Trump as if he were like an animal, as if he doesn't know what he's really doing. He's just stumbling along. And the reason they get away with that sometimes is that Trump is, in fact, a Gestalt thinker. He's a guy who sees, they say he works from his gut. He's a guy who sees the big picture and feels his way a little bit. But he has definite plans. His plans have to do, he's always thinking about China. In this case, he's thinking about, can we separate Russia and China a little bit? Can we pry them apart a little bit? He's always thinking about where the United States is going to end up at the end of a situation. And here's one thing I'll say, and I could be wrong. I'm speaking from memory here, but I've seen Trump come out of a negotiation with nothing. That sometimes happens to everybody. You go in, you don't get what you want, and you walk away. I've never seen him come out of a negotiation with America in a worse position than it was when he went in. And so whatever happens here, I feel, I kind of trust him that we're not going to get ourselves in deeper than we want to be.
Did you know all chips and fries used to be cooked in tallow? Up until the 1990s, when big corporations switched to cheap processed seed oils. Disgusting. Today, seed oils make up 20% of the average American's daily calories. Recent studies have linked seed oils to metabolic health issues and inflammation, but Masa did something about it. You've heard me talk about this over the last couple of weeks. I love these chips. They created a delicious tortilla chip with just 3 ingredients and no seed oils, organic corn, sea salt, and 100% grass-fed beef tallow. I literally just ate some before I came up here. These chips avoid all the bad stuff. They taste so good. Masa is crunchier, tastier, and doesn't break in your guac. Snacking on Masa chips is nothing like eating regular chips. With Masa, you feel satisfied and light with no crash or bloat afterwards. And they're better. They just taste better too. The beef tallow makes the chips satiating so you won't find yourself uncontrollably binging and still feeling hungry afterwards. Masa chips is beloved by tens of thousands of customers and has been endorsed by industry-leading health and nutrition experts. I just saw my parents this weekend and brought them some. So if you're ready to give Masa a try, go to masachips.com/afterparty and use code afterparty for 25% off your first order. That's masachips.com/afterparty and code afterparty for 25% off your first order.